Kelly Minter, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Well, I'm so excited for you to be here. I absolutely love everything that you do and everything you put out. And it
Oh,
started way back when I told Vicki Courtney this too, when she was on a couple months
okay.
ago, that I did one of your studies with my girls group when my daughter was younger. And that was my first introduction to you. You were on video and we were doing some kind of
Yes.
study. I don't even remember what
Yes.
it was called, but I was like, who is she? I love her.
That is so funny. Well, that's a miracle because I remember that whole taping and we shot it at this really, it was a really cool space, but it was right on top of a train track. And every time that I went to do my piece, that train would come through. And I was so discombobulated by the end. Plus, I was so new to any kind of recording and stuff. And so the fact that any of like goodness came from that is amazing.
Well, it was amazing. And I totally was taken with you then and have loved following your journey. So what was that study called again?
Oh gosh, I don't even remember.
Yeah.
That's terrible. But I think it was because I was a guest on it and I think it's been like 12 years.
Yeah.
So, oh man, we'll have to go do a little Google research on that.
Okay. We'll look that up.
We'll check it out.
Kelly, tell us about where you grew up and a little bit about your beginnings.
Yeah, so I grew up outside of Virginia, or no, opposite. I grew up, I just taught Bible study for an hour, so my brain is all in the Sermon on the Mount right now. So I grew up outside of Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. That's what I was trying to say. So, right outside of the city in Virginia, and my mom and dad started a church the year before I was born there. And my dad and my mom, they're still there. My dad's still preaching pretty much every single week there, which is incredible. So I grew up in a very kind of urban might not be the right word, but just very, very city, very, progressive. I mean, you're talking about lots and lots of people that were working in DC and government and, military and policy and all of that. So it was a very fast-paced environment and really a pretty interesting place to grow up as a believer and as a pastor's daughter, just because of, I think in some ways, how countercultural the message of Christ is, but also how there were so many believers that were loving the city and our country as well as followers of Christ. So that's where, so I grew up as a pastor's kid, and it has all the wonderful and all the hard that comes with that package, because it's always a package, but I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't trade it. And so I'm super grateful for that upbringing.
I love DC, and we have a
Yeah.
good friend that is raising her kids right now.
Oh, really?
Right outside in Northern Virginia.
It's a great place. It's such a great place. So rich with history and politics, and there's just a lot going on. It's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then you graduated from high school, I'm guessing.
Yes.
What happened after that?
Yeah, so I did a few years of college up at George Mason University in the same area. And then I transferred where I could do some online study because I started getting involved in music. And so I knew that I wanted to pursue that. And I started getting some opportunities in Nashville. And eventually, my senior year of college, actually had the opportunity to sign a record deal and to move to Nashville. And so that kind of cut some of my studies short near the end there. And I moved to Nashville many years ago, signed with Word Records, which is a record company here. And they got actually bought and sold really quickly right when I got to town, and they dropped pretty much all their new artists. And so I'd like moved my whole life down, and I was without a record deal within like 6 months. And then I ended up signing another record deal, and then that company went bankrupt. And then I ended up signing with another agency, and then somebody from there got put in jail. I mean, it was a one night disaster after the next. I mean, I could not catch a break. So much so that it was like it was like the Lord's hand was in it, but in the opposite way that I wanted everything to go. But it was so clear that he was thwarting this particular path. And so it was a hard first several years here in this town, as so many people in the music industry find out. But it was really such a purifying time and experience for me. And it's really where my faith deepened, and where I wanted the Lord to do a lot of things through me, but he was doing things in me, which is never, yeah. We're typically not that excited about that part,
right.
The in part. We want the through part, but not the in part. And so he was changing me, and he was humbling me, and he was also deepening my relationship with him and showing me what it means to truly live in his presence and in intimacy with him, and find that fulfillment and trust him. I mean, it stunk. I mean, the whole several years here were some of the hardest in my life. And I thought I was moving to town to be rich and famous, all for the glory of Jesus, right? And so of course the Lord had lots of other plans for me, but it was in the disappointment of the record deal and all that kind of stuff that I actually ended up getting an opportunity to write my first book, and then being exposed to Lifeway, which is where I've written all my Bible studies, or I've used them as my publisher for the last 12 years. And then my very last record deal that I signed, actually the president of that company was also very involved in the Amazon jungle. And that's how I got connected with Justice and Mercy International and doing all this mission work. So it was really interesting. If I really backtrack it, there was really no way that I was going to get to Bible studies, books, speaking, teaching, mission without the very difficult path of the music industry. So the Lord had it. He knew where this was all going, but I can tell you, right, it did not feel like he had it at all. It did not feel like he had it. And it was a really humbling and hard time, but I wouldn't trade it. And it was very necessary. It was very necessary for me.
So I want to hear a little bit more about how you did that U-turn into writing. I mean, was that something you always liked to do? Was it something you were pursuing at all? Or was it truly like out of nowhere? How did that progression happen?
Well, so I was a songwriter, so I loved writing. I mean, I was always very interested in writing and reading in English. And so it wasn't totally out of the blue, but it certainly wasn't it wasn't what I thought. It wasn't what I thought I was going to do. And I really thought that I mean, music was what I wanted to do. I wanted to write songs, and I wanted to perform those songs and record those songs and tour those songs. But it's not like I made the leap from songwriting to electrical engineering. It was still in the same, it was still in the same genre, sort of. But I was actually on tour with another group, and they had a publishing deal, and that's how I met the man who published my first book through Waterbrook Press. And it was really just because he had a heart for songwriters. He loved songwriters, and he wanted songwriters to write books. And so I'd actually been in a text in all my heartache. I was in John's gospel in John chapter 2, where Jesus turns, and I think this is right. Let me just, I think that's right. But where Jesus turns the water into wine, and what I know is right. What I know about this part of the story is that nobody knew who had done that. I mean, Jesus did that very discreetly. The only ones that knew were the disciples and his mother Mary. The master of the banquet didn't know. The bride didn't know. The bridegroom didn't know. The guests at the wedding certainly didn't know. But there was one other group of people that also knew, and it was the servants. It was the servants who Jesus had told, go fill those water jars with water and then bring them to the master of the banquet. But the thing was, the master of the banquet wasn't out of water. He was out of wine. So this is an enormous act of obedience on the servant's part. First of all, it says that they filled the buckets to the brim, those jars to the brim. So they didn't hold anything back. And then they obeyed it, and they took water to the master of the banquet. And it was somewhere in between them carrying that water that it became wine. it's really interesting when you go back and you look at that story, that Jesus didn't gather everybody around and say, okay, now you're water and now you're wine. And it was not like that. It was this whole thing that happened in this act of obedience. And it says that the servants who had drawn the water knew. And the reason they knew was because they had drawn water and then they had delivered wine. So they were not confused. But what the Lord did in that period of time was he showed me that he was calling me to servanthood. He wasn't calling me to stardom. Bummer, right?
Dang.
No, actually now all these years later, praise God, right? I mean, servanthood is where it's at. And that's the thing. Now I don't always get it right. My goodness, I don't. But that's the joy. And so to be his servant, to be the servant of others, that's what he was calling me to. All that said is that's what I wrote my first book on. Now it sold less than 5 copies, I'm pretty sure, but that was what I wrote my first book on. And it was called Water into Wine. It's been out of print for many, many years. But then that is what got me connected to Lifeway to begin writing my first Bible study. So yeah, lots of kind of memory lane there.
Okay, so I also want to ask you a little more about this mission work that you've become involved with. So tell us a little bit about that journey and what you've been doing with them.
Yes, absolutely. So I work with an organization called Justice and Mercy International, and they work in 2 countries right now. We work in Brazil in the Amazon jungle, which is where I began going first and what I love. And then we also work in the small country of Eastern Europe, this country called Moldova, which sits between Romania and the Ukraine. So I'll talk about the Amazon first. So I'd signed this record deal. It's an incredible place. They published songs like In Christ Alone and Blessed Be Your Name and 10,000 Reasons. And Here I Am to Worship, and just so many great songs. And I was so happy to be at that company and be able to do worship music like that. And so the president of the company, though, he was involved in this ministry in the Amazon and invited me to come and see what that ministry was like. And so I began going over 10 years ago. I think I've gone maybe over 20 times. And we began to see this great need. Obviously, you've got hundreds of thousands of people that sit along the river that are forgotten largely by the government, really by everybody. And they need the gospel. They need physical help, so many different things. And so I just started getting on these boats, and we'd sleep in hammocks, and we'd go down the river, and we would be part of this ministry in the villages. And I was bringing my dad, and my dad, is a pastor. And so inevitably what would happen is we'd get to these certain villages, and my dad would end up meeting the jungle pastors, which I just had never thought about. Jungle pastors, pastors born and raised in the jungle, and that, fish for their food and live off the land and live in obscurity. I'd never met until in the last 10 years, these pastors and their wives who, these women who would go out and spear fish in the morning, literally, that would, have to use their machete to kill snakes in the village. I mean, it's just crazy, right? And so we began to realize that these men and women were doing this incredible work, but with nothing, with no resources, with very little training, with very little equipping, with very little support. And so we decided, Justice and Mercy International decided that one of our main focuses is that we wanted to focus on those jungle pastors, and that in so doing and having conferences for them and equipping them and teaching them, then we would also be able to, off of that, we'd be able to touch the children that are in their villages. We'd be able to reach special families with special needs children. We'd be able to help with medical needs. We'd be able to help with, food supply during the flood, rebuilding of homes, all of those things that go along. And so we have a jungle pastors conference. We actually do it 2 times a year. And it's crazy what God is doing. I mean, over 100 pastors and their wives come, and we bring them in, and it is an amazing week. And it really is something that helps sustain them for the year. And of course, we have a large staff on the ground that helps them.
Now, do you do it down there?
Oh yeah.
Brazil?
We're in the jungle down there. We bring them all in on boats. Some of them travel 5, 6, 7 days just to get there. So it's pretty incredible.
That's amazing. And so I'm assuming you're a huge part of that training at this point.
Yeah, well, a huge part, we've got amazing people on the ground. Our staff in Brazil is phenomenal, and we bring so many amazing teachers. I do love to teach and be with the women. And probably one of the biggest ways that I'm able to help is through our Cultivate events. I've got a women's event called Cultivate, and it's really the generosity of the women that come and attend that event that support jungle pastors for a year. And through that support, basically what they're doing is they're paying for them to get to that conference and to be at that conference. And so through that has been amazing, not just the work that the Lord's allowed me to do on the ground there, but it's been so awesome to be all over this country and have women come to the table and support a jungle pastor and sponsor a jungle pastor to this conference. And so that's why we've been able to move to 2 conferences, and very soon we'll go to 3. So we'll be reaching hundreds of families and villages as a result. And then we do follow-up mission trips to those local villages with our pastors there. And it just builds on itself. Very exciting work. And then we work in Moldova in a very, very different setting. Moldova is the highest percentage of trafficked children in Europe. Not necessarily the highest number, but the highest percentage for the size of that country. Very corrupt, impoverished, and we have homes for kids over there whose lives are being changed. We're working in the orphanages, although they're shutting the orphanages, so we've had to move to the rural villages and support vulnerable kids there, right, in these hard environments. And we have another great, amazing staff there. So God is at work, and the mission work really fuels my excitement. And they absolutely give me more than I'm able to give them. But I think that's also the body of Christ, that we fuel one another's faith. And so I will say that all those years ago that I was moving to Nashville, thinking that the Lord was going to give me this record deal or the ways that I wanted to be used, the annual Jungle Pastors Conference in the Amazon was not on the list, but it has been by far one of the greatest joys of my life. So I'm thrilled that the Lord did not give me my way there.
Yeah. Are you always looking for support? Like if people that are listening are like, I want to look more into that. What kind of opportunity do you have for people?
Yeah. My goodness. So justiceandmercy.org is the website. And there are so many different ways to get involved, whether it's sponsoring one of our children in Moldova. We have so many kids that need sponsorship there, whether it's sponsoring a pastor in the Amazon to the conference, whether it's taking a trip. We also have a lot of people that just are able to send in money, which we always can put to good use. And the great thing about what I get to do with JMI is that I am part of their work on a daily basis. I office with them, and their executive director is one of my dearest friends, and the president is the pastor of my church. And so the beauty for me is that I don't even have to try to get excited or to believe in this. I'm living it, and it just is one of the most I just think, as far as the gospel and Jesus Christ and the integrity of the ministry, I just can't say enough about it. So yeah, justiceandmercy.org, if anyone wants to check us out and see how they can be involved. We've got plenty of ways that we could use you.
Well, thanks, Kelly. Thanks for using your influence in the way that you are, because as you say, that you see your role as being partly to raise money for
absolutely
these events to happen. You're using what influence you have. And as far as our listeners go, I think they can relate to a lot of your story of, my plan was to go this way, and somehow I ended up here. And in retrospect, I can see all these steps that got me to this point. But in those moments, I had no idea where I was headed. And that's why we call ourselves the Open Door Sisterhood, because we have to just walk through that next door that's open and that next door that God opens for us. And pretty soon you're raising money for jungle pastors to come to conferences.
Right. You just you have no idea. And that's the encouragement I hope for those who are out there listening, that if it is a confusing time or if it's a dark time, I mean, I have been there. I have been in depression. I had paralyzing anxiety. I have wondered where the Lord was. I have questioned so many things. I've had to walk away from things. There are times where it is just the valley and it is dark and you can't see. And it's great once you can see and you can go, oh, I'm so glad the Lord worked all this out. But the fact of the matter is that it's when you can't see that your faith is tested, and it's when you can't see that your obedience matters. And I think Jesus jumps up and down. I really do. I believe he jumps up and down when he sees his children choose obedience when it just doesn't make sense, and when it's so hard. And the thing is that when it's easy to obey, it just kind of sucks the life out of obedience a little bit. And so it's those times where I was thinking about that we can really only be faithful to God in the hard times. There's no other way to be faithful to him in the hard times and the good times. And so if you're in the hard time, take the opportunity to lean into him.
Mm-hmm. Right. Because faith, the thing about faith is there has to be an unknown for it to be faith, right?
Yeah.
It's not faith. So
yes.
There has to be that stepping
Challenge.
out when you don't know the outcome, or else it's not faith at all. So, but that's hard. It's a hard step when you don't know what's going to happen on the other side.
Yes, totally.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Well, so Kelly, you've been really doing a lot of Bible studies, and then you kind of take this turn into this new book, which is about food and the table. And so talk to us a little bit about how this book came about when you've been doing something totally different.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so it is totally different. And then it's also not, because for the last 10 years with my Bible studies, I've always included recipes. And the reason is because when I first started, I was trying to have a group of girls help me kind of sort through the Bible study material. And the only way I felt, good about them doing that is me cooking for them. And that wasn't even really helpful for them at the time, because I wasn't very good at cooking. And so we all kind of learned together. This actually is probably about 14 years ago. And so we all began to learn together. We were all in our, 20s and trying to figure it out. And so I would cook, but then they would start cooking and we would swap around to homes. And so I just thought, well, wouldn't it be fun to include those recipes? Well, that just took on a life of its own. And so now all these years later, finally, B&H publishers who are connected with Lifeway, they just said, have you ever thought about doing just a truly proper cookbook? Not a devotion cookbook, not a Bible study cookbook, but just a cookbook. And I really had not. But what was so fun is that one of the women that I go to the Amazon with, her name is Regina Pinto. And you can actually follow her on social media. She's at The Timeless Kitchen is her little handle, The Timeless Kitchen, just for fun recipes and stuff. But she's a really accomplished chef and incredible, and is retired and just was, ready to do something different. Well, we started going to the Amazon together because she is Brazilian and has lived in America for many years. And so she speaks the language. And so she started serving with us. And so we got to know each other really well. And, come to find out, she's had a chocolate business in Nashville and a bakery, and sold into some of the finest hotels and restaurants here, just incredible, and vineyards. And so when I had this opportunity, I thought, well, I need a true chef to partner with, and so I went to Regina and I said, we're going to write a cookbook together. And I had to arm wrestle her, but she finally gave in. And so we've got over 90 recipes. It's all beautifully photographed. So I had somebody ask me today, are there pictures in this? Because if there aren't pictures, I can't do it. And I'm like, we've got a picture of everything. So pictures. And then it was an opportunity for me to just share more about my personal life and just fun things about hospitality and community and the importance of community. And so it's a beautiful hardback, stories, spiritual encouragement, recipes, gardening and hospitality and cooking tips and tricks. So just really exciting, really fun. And it's called A Place at the Table, because our heart is really for us to just reach out to people. And honestly, it would be a huge disappointment to me if people just got the cookbook and just made recipes. What I hope that will happen is that this will be a real ministry tool in the hands of the people who get it, that they would feel empowered, that they could make recipes, have people over, whether it's people from church or people from on the street in the neighborhood, and just a way to serve others and a way to develop community. So I'm super excited. It's a new tool for me to reach people that maybe aren't ready to do a Bible study on like Nehemiah,
Right.
but they might be ready to make like tomato basil soup, And so I'm just really hoping that it will put me in touch with a whole group of people that I wouldn't otherwise be in touch with, and be able to introduce them to Christ.
So Kelly, where I'm going to rephrase that. What does hospitality look like for you in your daily life? What does it mean for you to gather people?
Yeah, so it can be fancy all the way down to really last minute and casual. And I think that there's a time and place for all of it. A few weeks ago, I had a neighbor over who's going through a hard time, and then just really two neighbors, one who's just going through a hard time. And I thought, well, what a good way for us to just bring encouragement and get to know one another better than over a meal. And sometimes when you have somebody, like we could have met at a restaurant, but you've got a lot of stuff going on. And I thought, well, I want to have them into my home, because I want them to know that they can come into my home anytime that they want. I want them to know that they've got a place there, that if they need anything, that they can call me, text me. And so when you bring them into your home, then I think that is just very meaningful. Plus it's just unhurried. So I spent a little more time on that just because I wanted it to be nice. And I had another friend down the street who kind of helped me pull some things together, and she's really good in the kitchen. Then the next night I had family members in town, and then some other friends, and that was a little bit larger of a dinner party, and it was a little harried because I was running from things, but that's also, I kind of hate that. I like things to be put together, but then that's also an opportunity where people want to help. I mean, they do. They walk in and they want to help. And so it's like, okay, great. Yeah, you can put the salad in the salad spinner, help get the lettuce washed or whatever. And so there's a lot of natural community that happens around the table. Then it can just be just as absolutely casual as, hey, I made soup. And whoever wants to come over can come over, and there's also going to be a football game on or whatever. But I think to me, it's having people in your home. It's nourishing them both physically but spiritually. And it's giving them a place of belonging. And I think that that's what we're missing right now in our culture is we have a million social media friends, but we're disconnected. And people want to know that they belong. And it's hard to be sitting at someone's table and not feel like you belong when you're there. So that's what it looks like for me. Like I said, every so often it's fancy. Most of the time it's pretty casual, but it's just giving people a place.
As you've been talking to people, what have you found has been the roadblocks? When you said you want this book to empower people, what keeps them from inviting people over?
Yeah. Time. I think time is the big thing, right? We're all too busy. We're too busy because it requires time to get a meal together and ready. So I think time is a big one. We have to choose that we're going to use some of our time for hospitality. I would say fear is a big one. We are afraid that we're going to burn the pine nuts, or the dressing's not going to taste good, or it's not going to all come out of the oven at the right time. So fear is legitimate. I mean, I put this huge bolognese sauce in the wrong pot last week. I put it in this cast iron pot because it was the only pot big enough. And I didn't realize that cast iron gets so hot, even if it's on a low setting. I don't know what I was thinking. I put it on a simmer, and I went and took a nap. When I woke up, I came out and my kitchen was like a smoke, and the whole bottom of the bolognese had burned to a crisp. And I walked over and everybody was coming in like an hour. And I'm like, okay, so we're getting tacos from up the street. It's like, thank goodness I was able to salvage it. But you're feeding people. So I think fear sometimes, but that's what we try to do in this cookbook is give you accessible recipes, give people accessible recipes that they can do, that we can all do, that aren't too hard. And then I would say also just our own like pride gets in the way, because I don't know if you're like me, but I want my house to not look like a disaster. And that sometimes my house looks great and sometimes it's a disaster. And so I think sometimes we want everything just so, and maybe we're doing a disservice to the people that it may not even be good for them to come over and see everything just so, because then that just makes us all feel bad. It's like, sometimes I like to go over to somebody's house and see that it's not perfect, because then it's like, oh, okay, good. Well, me neither. So yeah, I think that's a great question. I think we let a lot of things get in our way that don't need to get in our way. And I think too, we try to hold to this like Pinterest standard, and we just got to lose some of that and just open up our doors and put a meal in front of someone, ask them how they're doing. And it'll be amazing what opens up as a result.
Mm-hmm. So, right. We complicate it way too much.
Oh gosh. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I want to hear who some of your influencers have been in the writing of this book.
And the writing of the cookbook.
Okay. So Kelly, did you have some resources that influenced you in the writing of this book?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been enjoying the idea of food and gardening and cultivating and cooking for many, many years. So I enjoy reading books on that type of thing. And so one of the ones is a book by Michael Pollan called In Defense of Food. And that's probably one of the first books many years ago that got me thinking about, what am I actually eating? And it's in defense of food, because his point was that we eat a lot of things that's not really food. When I take my niece and nephew to the, grocery store, and they want certain types of packaged processed desserts with all kinds of artificial colors and different things. This is not food. It's something it's edible, but it's not food. And so he began to really walk us through how far we have gotten in our society and culture from actually eating food. And and just how healing and nourishing real, whole, unprocessed food is. And that really began to change how I cooked and how I thought about things. He also had some fun things in there, like, he's like, hey, desserts aren't bad. Just only eat the desserts that you are willing to make for yourself from scratch. And so I thought, well, that's really kind of a fun thing, because who's going to go to all that trouble to make a from scratch cake, or from scratch cookies? But when you do, great, enjoy that, make it special, but don't just be grabbing prepackaged things constantly. And so anyway, it's an amazing book. And then another really cool kind of memoir is by a woman named Barbara Kingsolver. She's an extraordinary writer. None of these people, by the way, I don't think necessarily are Christ followers, but they're just incredibly gifted and insightful. And Barbara Kingsolver wrote a book called Animal Vegetable Miracle, and it was really a documentary or a memoir of her family surviving off of their land for a year. And they would only eat, not just their land, because they were on a farm, but anything within, I think, 100 miles, I think is what it was. So in other words, if it was January, they weren't going to go get an apple from the grocery store, or trying to think about it, had to be within a certain amount of time, and it had to be in season. It was just very limited what they allowed themselves. And it was fascinating just what they learned about food and gardening and cultivating. And it's a great read. She's a fabulous writer, and it's awesome. And
I'm so excited. I have not read either of these, and I'm a total foodie, so I'm super excited about these.
Oh, Barbara Kingsolver is going to blow your mind. She's fabulous as far as it's a great read. And just it also makes you think seasonally. And it was like their family, I think everybody got to keep like one thing, like coffee or like olive oil or something like that. But for the most part, if you couldn't get it seasonally, and if it wasn't available, then you just had to wait for it. But they talked about how special that was when, the berries came back around, or, so it's really cool. And then Joel Salatin, now he is interesting character. He's got a huge farm in the Shenandoah Valley, does everything super, super old school. And he's got I think it's funny. It's called Folks, This Ain't Normal. He's edgy in it. I'm not saying I agree with all of his stances or anything like that, but he is fascinating, where he's basically saying, folks, it's not normal to eat everything out of a plastic bag or out of a box or out of a plastic carton. I mean, he just is basically like, we are so far from what the original intention of how this was all supposed to work. It's ridiculous. And like I said, it's just an interesting read, gives you a neat perspective. So those were a few of the things. And then of course, Regina and all of her insight played a lot into the cookbook.
Yeah, and so special. You can do that with a friend. I just think that's
I
so
know.
awesome to work on a project like that together.
Oh, she's fab. She's fabulous. Yeah. She's like my Portuguese mom. So she's awesome.
It's so great.
Or my Brazilian mom, I should say.
Yeah. Well, we do want to get to some practicals, Kelly, of just fun things about you and what makes your life work. So talk to us about some things that you cannot live without in your daily life that are just super helpful and practical.
Well, so I can live without coffee, but I would prefer not to. So
Right.
I've got a really fun little French press that I love having a French press there, just in case you're in a pinch and, you got to be able to make that there. So I like having that. I'm trying to think some of the more practical things. Great. Maybe you can prompt me on a couple of those if that's possible. That's great. Okay.
Okay. So Kelly, So Kelly, what are some things that you are like, I cannot live without these? These are my go-tos.
Okay. Well, I think, so one of the things that I love, and this may sound odd for that as a response, but I love my herb garden. And I love an herb garden because you can kind of have it year round. I mean, even when it gets really cold, there are certain herbs like rosemary and things that you can have that are growing. But I love that because at any point in time, I can just go out there and I can grab it for dipping oil, for bread, or I can put it in soups, or in salads or in dressings. And so, yeah, I love having an herb garden.
Do you ever do your herb garden indoors?
I don't, but I've heard some people who do, or do them like in little pots, just even right outside. So yeah, there's lots of different ways. I've just got them in a section in my garden, but lots of different ways you can do that.
For those of us in winter climates, I'm committing to the indoor herb garden this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
You should do it. I'm sure that there's a way. It is so awesome just to be able to grab those fresh herbs, and especially in winter. Also, yeah, so I love, so I have working sweatpants and home sweatpants. And I know as a writer, I just have to be comfortable. So when I'm writing or I'm studying, I like to be comfortable. But if I'm wearing my home personal sweatpants, then I just feel like a lazy sloth. And so I actually changed out of my personal sweatpants into my professional working sweatpants. And that makes me feel better about myself. I only do this when I'm home. I don't wear sweatpants to my office, but when I'm home and I'm working, I make sure I'm in my home, my working sweatpants. So just in case anybody else.
Sweatpants are. I mean, what kind of sweatpants?
So, well, I've got all different. I actually have several. So I've got some from Gap Body. I love the way that they do theirs. I think I have some from REI, and then the sleeping ones I don't mind. Those are like a little more flimsy, and but you just got to make a mental switch. That you're actually at work. So yeah, those are. And then I love the Trader Joe's peanut butter cups.
Do you like the dark chocolate or the milk chocolate?
It's cool to say that I like the dark chocolate, but what I really like is the milk chocolate. So I love, everybody's into dark chocolate, but let's be honest, milk chocolate is awesome. And so, but if I only had one, I could do the dark too. They're awesome.
Uh-huh. What about some things that make your life work well right now?
Well, I would say like on the emotional, spiritual side, something that's really helped me, especially over the last several years, and this can sound cliche, but I think it really is a biblical concept, is that just staying in my lane and not comparing myself to everybody else, and not thinking, oh, I should be doing that, or this person's doing that so much better, or maybe I should, but really just fulfilling the daily faithfulness that the Lord has called me to. And I think all of us can benefit from that, that there's just more rest when we own what the Lord has called us to. And I think you can see that. I mean, you see that in scripture even. I mean, what if Paul was constantly thinking, man, I wonder if I should be like over there with the Jews, I mean, whatever my ministry should be to the Jews, like James and, or if they were vice versa thinking, man, I wonder if we're really missing it, that we're not over really teaching Jesus to the Gentiles, like Paul is. And I think any time we begin to compare ourselves and we just get off track. And so being able to celebrate others, but also just know what God has called us to, and to stay there and to be faithful with it. That's been really helpful. And then
do you have anything
also,
do you have anything even mentally that you do that helps you with that? Like, is there something you say to yourself, or, what narrative, I guess, is happening in your mind?
Yeah.
When you catch yourself in those moments? Yeah,
I think you have to, like you just said, you have to catch it. When you catch it, you kind of have to grab the thought and just I just will remind myself of the truth that I know that whatever it is that the Lord has called me to, that's what I need to worry about. That's what I need to fulfill. And then, of course, when we're in scripture, we're going to naturally be challenged and sanctified in those areas and be reminded. So, I mean, there is a great passage in 2 Corinthians. It's near the end of Paul's letter there, but where he talks about it's not wise to compare ourselves amongst ourselves. So even scripture and things like that, that help, but also just to be reminded of the joy that it is to do what I'm called to do, and to seek the Lord in that, and to find contentment in that.
Which means you need to know what you're called to do, which that can be a challenge to some people. But I think the more you go to God and have some clarity, then the more you can step into things without comparing yourself.
Yeah. And Alex, that's a great point. And I think sometimes too, we make this huge issue of that we need this one single thing that we've like put on earth to do. And really, I mean, you go to Matthew chapter 9 and you look at verses 35 and 36 and 37, right in that section where Jesus is like, look, the harvest field is ripe for harvest. Pray that the Lord of the harvest will send laborers. And so I think sometimes we want this specific call when the Lord has given us a universal call, every single one of us, to be loving the Lord with all of our heart, soul, strength, and mind, to be loving our neighbors, to be out ministering to people, and whatever that looks like. And then I think as we begin to follow him in that general call, I think it does begin to specify for us. But I think we're kind of in this me culture of like, what's my purpose? Like, I just want the Lord to give me this one big vision dream. And I would say that I don't know that it works. He's already revealed himself to us. So as we're in scripture, we're going to see what he's called us to. And then as we begin to be obedient, I think that begins to personalize.
It's a good word. I like that a lot.
Are you doing
a 1-year Bible plan?
Yeah.
Right now,
So this year I'm doing the 1-year Bible plan, and so we're in a part of the year that I should be like 2/3 done. And I'm probably more like 60% done. So I'm behind, but what I love is that I'm doing it. And so even if I don't finish until April of, the following year, I'm so thankful to have this plan. And I love it. I'm loving that I'm kind of getting the big sweeping view of both the Old and New Testament, just really the story of the Bible. I love that even when I'm behind, I know exactly where I need to go just to step back up. And it's been a great discipline to be in the Word like that.
Which one are you doing?
As I can. I'm doing a chronological one, and I can't remember exactly what it's called, but you can, Google chronological plans. And I think the idea is that even though you are in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, like say that there are repetitions in Kings and in Chronicles, you'll read those side by side, and you're going kind of in order. So, because, our Hebrew, the Old Testament is not set up in a chronological order. So this way you're reading through it chronologically. And so that's been really cool.
So great. Yeah. Okay. What about a favorite tradition?
So I would say a favorite tradition of mine is are you talking holiday tradition? Or are you just talking just kind of any kind of thing?
Any tradition.
Okay. Well, one of the things that we're kind of starting in our own family, friends, community, but my brother makes pizza dough, which I love. He makes bread, and he makes his own homemade pizza dough, and then we make homemade pizzas together. And he and his wife bring their kids, my nieces and my nephew, and we have friends over. And that's just becoming, and we actually cook them all on the Big Green Egg. A friend of mine has one of those. And so, we're like firing up hardcore. And so that's been like over the last few years, that's become kind of this new tradition that we will do, oftentimes on a Sunday, late afternoon or evening. And it's really fun because we roll it out the doughs together. We make the pizzas together, and my friend grills them, and then we all sit around and eat pizzas. That's been a really just fun communal kind of thing that we started up, that I hope my nieces and nephew will remember, and that they'll tie that experience to community and the love that is surrounding them.
Oh, they totally will. I was actually just looking at how sense of smell and memory are connected, how it's the strongest memory trigger is the sense of smell. And so,
that's awesome.
Yeah, so they totally will. That will be such a fun memory for them.
That is so cool.
Is your brother's pizza dough recipe in your cookbook?
Yeah. So here's the disclaimer on that. His is so complex, and because he has his own yeast that he keeps, he orders some of his wheat berries from other parts of the country and grinds his own wheat. I mean, so we were like, David, if we put this in the cookbook, there's just nobody's going to ever do this. And so Regina put a very accessible dough in the cookbook, but we do have his pizza sauce recipe, which is super simple. It's just those San Marzano tomatoes. And I think he does just a little bit of salt and pepper and fresh garlic, and he just pulses it in the blender, and it is the best sauce. It's the best sauce. So that's in the cookbook too. But that's easy. I just gave it to you. Anybody can do it.
That sounds accessible.
Yeah, very accessible, and way better than anything you'll get from the store. I mean, you get obviously the San Marzano from the store, but the San Marzano tomatoes, that's a very Italian way to do pizza sauce, and they just have a great flavor.
Sounds like your brother is in defense of food camp.
Yeah, at least on bread. At least with bread. Every single Sunday, he is making some sort of bread at his house, and his kids and family, man, they are such benefactors of that, which is awesome.
That's so fun.
Yeah.
Okay, what about a favorite recipe?
So my favorite recipe is probably the berry trifle recipe, which is a Regina family. It had been like a family secret in their family for years. She didn't give it away. And then finally she was like, I'm giving all my recipes away.
Oh, that's so nice. So thanks, Regina.
I know, Regina, she just gave it all up for the cookbook, but it is really great. It's layers of kind of like a light custard with berries and, homemade whipped cream, and then also ladyfingers in there. So it's really beautiful too. It's like a great, it presents really well. And it's not overly difficult. And it tastes great, which that kind of meets all three of my, needs, is accessible and presentable and tastes great. So the berry trifle, that would be my vote.
Berry trifles they are so pretty to bring. Yes. And people are always like, wow. And you're really just layering things, but it just looks beautiful whenever you bring it. It's like special.
Yeah, I totally agree. Awesome.
So can I ask the novice question?
Sure.
Can you make it far in advance, or do things get soggy, the ladyfinger?
You know what? I think you can. And I wish I knew for absolute sure, but I think you can, because I think it even needs to go into the refrigerator for a while to let everything sit. So I don't think they'll get soggy. I think you're good to get ahead of it.
Okay. That was my question.
That's a good one.
On the trifle.
I like it.
Kelly, this has been so fun to have you on the podcast today. And for those people who haven't done one of your Bible studies, what would you say is like one of your very favorite studies?
No Other Gods. I would say No Other Gods is probably my most personal life story, kind of life message. And I had the chance to really kind of do a major revision on that study recently and add videos to it. And Lifeway was gracious to come back around and do that and kind of re-release it at its 10-year anniversary. So it feels brand new to me in many respects, but I would say No Other Gods would be the one I would say.
Okay. So great. I wanted to point people to that. Well, this has been so fun, and we hope to have you back on in the future.
Hey, you guys, thank you so much for taking the time with me. I'm so grateful to be part of it.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, I'll be cooking up your recipes, and I'll be messaging you and telling you my favorites.
Hey, please do. Please do. And we should have one coming your way soon. We are just getting our shipment in today. So I'm really excited. So thank you guys so much for having me.
Thank you, Kelly. Have a great day.
You guys are awesome. All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.